Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast Rise and Tell with Sheekha. Our guest for today is Tom Haggarty. He is a retired corporate executive and a business fixer, and his career spans over 45 years. He's not just an author, but he's made presentations at numerous public and private events. He's written a lot of articles, and he has been interviewed by a variety of print publications and electronic media outlets. Tom Haggarty is the author of the book, The Business of Relationships. He talks about how there's an $8 trillion impact for bad relationships. He talks about how Americans don't trust each other, that everything is black and white. His quotes are deep, and he is someone who likes to document a lot of quotes from famous CEOs. And that's how he ended up writing his book, The Business of Relationships. So let's not waste any time and let's get started. So Tom, welcome to our show.
Sheekha, it's a pleasure to be here. Greetings.
Thank you. All right, we'll just dive right in, Tom. I am excited to know your story.
My story. Well, I'll begin at the beginning. How's that? I am the oldest of 10 children. They range in age from me at age 71 to a sister who is 54. 9 of us of the 10 are still alive. Our parents are not. And I lost my brother to cancer in 1990 when he was 34 years old. So that's kind of the family background, if you will. We still see each other frequently and lots of family functions, no strife, no messes, at least ones that don't become public. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And then, I'm a college educated suburbanite. I crafted a career in business, both working for large and small companies, and for about 25 years having my own consulting firm. And we became known as corporate turnaround people. You know, if your company was in trouble, or if your lawyer or your accountant or your insurance guy, or most importantly, your banker thought you were in trouble, we were a firm that you could call. And,
right.
and we fixed a lot of companies. We sold a few. We had to close a few. But that's basically my background. And then, later in life, with 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren, I wrote a book. And it was published in late 2023, early 2024. And that's probably something we'll discuss today, but it's a book about relationships and how to apply business wisdom to make them better.
Awesome. Congratulations on your book, Tom.
Thank you.
It is a big deal. I've published my book in 2021, and I know what that process looks like, how much it takes to actually get your book out there, and especially the marketing. That is a huge deal. But I'm intrigued because you are talking about relationships and also business. When I was doing my research on you, I saw something where you mentioned there's an $8 trillion impact because of bad relationships. Let's talk about that. How did you get that concept? And then how did you relate it to the $8 trillion impact?
Well, I wish I could say it was my genius, but the $8 trillion actually comes from a Gallup survey that was done in 2022. And basically what Gallup showed was that failed relationships have an impact in business. They have an impact in terms of absenteeism. They have an impact in terms of lower productivity. They have an impact in lower retention of employees. Gallup was able to say in their survey that if you are in a bad relationship, a dysfunctional relationship, you are about 65% more likely to quit abruptly your employment than an employee in a thriving relationship, let's say. So the $8 trillion is quantified across the world's businesses, and that's what Gallup said was the number, the $8 trillion. What is even more staggering to me is not in the same survey, but in the same suite of surveys, they were saying that all of a sudden now 68% of us don't trust each other.
Oh. Wow.
We don't trust each other because we're not reliable. We don't trust each other because we have missed commitments. That kind of thing. But that is way up from what it was, say, in the middle 1970s, when about 55% of us said, I fundamentally do trust other people. Now that is down to 32%.
Wow.
There's another 60% of us now with the advent of AI and Amazon and immediate delivery of just about everything. 60% of us are saying that loneliness is our constant companion. We're the most technologically advanced society in history, but yet we don't relate with one another. And that is on the rise. So those are some pretty difficult statistics to look at. And I think the one that really troubles me the most here in America, and it may not be the same in Canada where you are, but the one that troubles me the most here in America is that in this country where we pride ourselves on being the richest country in history, the most powerful country in history, the most technologically advanced, all of that, yet we have put our children in a position where they are 3 times more likely to grow up in a single parent household than the worldwide average. And you think about that, if the worldwide average of kids growing up in a single parent household is, say, 8%, in America, it's 24%. It's 3 times that rate. So it's very, very troubling to me. And I think we have a lot of work to do on our relationships.
And what would you say when we talk about relationships? Is it relationship with coworkers or relationship with your family, your spouse, or is it everything?
It's all of the above.
Okay.
These are interpersonal relationships. They can be familial, they can be platonic, they can be romantic, they can be collegial. It's the neighbor, it's the friend, it's the golf partner, it's the spouse, the child, the sibling, the parent. It's all of the above.
Okay. What would you say to someone who is closed? Let's say someone who hasn't been that friendly since they were a little child. For whatever reasons, let's say they have a very difficult time making friends. And even if they make friends, they have a very difficult time maintaining those relationships because let's be honest, every relationship in this day and age requires input and time from both the ends.
Mm-hmm.
And so what if there's this person, when you ask them, okay, how many friends do you have? They say, okay, I have 5 friends. But then how often are you meeting them? Tell me what's going on in this third person's life. This person has no clue because they haven't made the effort. So what would you suggest to someone like that?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to draw the distinction between, is a person healthy in a limited number of relationships, or are they not? Are they happy, or are they dissatisfied? So I think that's a line of questioning, if you will, that I would pursue, first of all, because there are people, Sheekha, as you well know, that are natural introverts. They prefer solitude. They prefer a contemplative life. I probably had a couple of grandparents that were like that just preferred their own company, but they were very happy and very well-adjusted people.
Yeah.
However, to your second point, if you are struggling and you realize you are struggling, I can't seem to make friends. I can't hold on to relationships. Everything I start blows up in my face. Then I think you have to look at, do you have or are you trying to enhance any of the qualities that are essential for good personal relationships? There has to be a sense of perspective. There has to be honesty and trust and integrity. There has to be a healthy dose of resilience, rather. There has to be a sense of appropriate risk and change. There has to be a willing to be humble. Humility is a key characteristic. So those are the kinds of things that I would pursue with someone if they were dissatisfied, and then try to work or design some strategies that accelerate the qualities where the weaknesses lie.
Right. Understood. Good point and good suggestion. I love how you tied it up to whether they're satisfied and they're happy or not with having the limited connections that they have, even if they're an introvert. But that makes me think, Tom, what if, our past experiences have not been that great? Which is why maybe today, as a person, as a leader, whatever, we are struggling to make those real connections, to maintain those relationships that we have. What would be your tip to someone like that who's had bad experiences in the past, and maybe that's why they're letting it affect their current relationships that they have?
I think, Sheekha, one of the biggest stumbling blocks for most people in a relationship is their own lack of self-awareness.
Yes.
I think if you are not courageous about looking in the mirror, if you're not courageous about getting your thoughts on paper, journaling is pretty fashionable and has been for some time. But I mean, people who are astute, people who are self-reflective, people who are somewhat analytical use those kind of tools. They're pretty fearless about looking in the mirror and assigning responsibility to themselves for some of the downfalls. And I think, they're probably also pretty fearless about getting thoughts out and on paper so that they can be disarmed in some cases. Some of the spiraling that goes on and the doom scrolling that goes on in your own mind, a lot of that can be helped if you just get it out on paper and begin to journal about it and recognize that you're part of this problem too. I think too many of us point outward at other people and say, well, it's his fault, it's her fault.
Yeah.
The boss did this, my employee wouldn't do that, and a lot of times a little self-reflection is the best medicine.
Correct. Oh, what a wonderful point, Tom, because most of our episodes in our podcast kind of hint at that first thing, is that make time for yourself so that you can do some reflection on your own, figure out what's working for you and what's not. And I think you bring up a very good point, because now what you're saying is that it directly impacts your relationships and everything around you if you are self-aware.
Yes.
Great point. Great point, Tom. Now I'm curious to know, in your experience as a business owner, as a father, or whichever role you played, what do you think is the most easiest thing one can do to excel at their job, at their workplace, at their family, in their relationships? What's that one simple thing that everybody usually misses out, but you've noticed it and you've written a book about it?
I would say that a fundamental quality, if I had to pick one of the qualities that you need for a good personal relationship, it would be resilience. I just think that we live in a time when the weak are going to have difficulty. If you are not strong and you are not resilient and you are not willing to accept the fact that the world is going to throw you some curveballs, it's not against you. It isn't because you said something 50 years ago that karma is suddenly punishing you now.
Right.
It is just the way of the world. And you have to be able to almost take the Stoic philosopher's position of saying, I can't control the circumstances. I can only control my response. And what is that response going to be? And if the response is going to be one of empathy and charity and grace and forgiveness, then you're going to thrive. If it's one of anger and self-pity and resentment, et cetera, then you're not going to thrive. So I think resilience is critical today.
Awesome. And when we talk about, I know we're talking about everything that's going wrong, or, asking you to give us suggestions for certain type of situations and certain kind of people with certain relationships. But in your opinion, and based on all the study that you did and your experience, what's an example of a thriving relationship?
I think a thriving relationship is one that both parties will treat each other as equals. Mm-hmm. They will come to the table with transparency, and they will have some or all of the 12 qualities that are widely acknowledged in good personal relationships. I mean, I think, you have to have a willingness to improve, certainly,
Right.
because none of us are going to be excellent at all of these qualities. But I think having a sense of perspective, again, having trust, honesty, and integrity in the relationship, having a sense of commitment that we're in this for the long haul, that there are going to be bumps in the road, but I am committed to the relationship.
Right.
The sense of appropriate risk and change is critical. I think humility, like we talked about, is critical. Respect for each other is critical. Distancing sometimes, where you say, I may not agree with your position, I may not agree with your choice or your decision, but you're an adult and I'm giving you the grace to make it. It's not about me. So I think those are critical now to good personal relationships.
Wow. I agree. I completely agree. I feel like we always strive by a certain standard in the society, and we've seen certain people and we base success based off of them and their stories, but we often forget that this is ours and we need to do the work. And like you said, respect and humility, I think that's something that most of us tend to forget every day in and out because we've been so busy with all other responsibilities that are going on that it's so easy to snap on your partner, or just yell, or just lose it just because you're busy or just because you're overwhelmed with other things. And knowing that you need to respect and also be respected at the same time is important for a thriving relationship. I think that is a reminder that everybody needs in today's world, irrespective of their culture, background, financial status, everything. And I think that's a great point, Tom. And distancing, it's very interesting you say that, because usually we've been taught that if you are taking yourself out of the equation, it doesn't mean that things are going well. But you here are saying that you need to have that healthy distance and understand and give the other person space to let them figure out what they're doing and be accountable for their decisions.
I agree. I mean, I think that we in the West, and I've been somewhat of a student of Eastern religions over a period of time. I think in the West, if you look at America, you look at Canada, you look at Western Europe, we are very much individualistic cultures. And we seem to thrive on either or, black and white kind of decisions. It's a very binary decision-making process, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in business, et cetera, et cetera. There's a right and a wrong. There's a black and a white. And I think the Eastern cultures, specifically the Buddhist culture, specifically Confucianism, Taoism, I think they are trained and skilled in holding opposing ideas at the same time. It can be both and, not either or.
Right.
And I think we would be better in the West if we could adopt more of that. It's a trite old saying, but doing a bad thing doesn't make you a bad person. Let's deal with the thing, but the person is still intact. The person is still good. The person is still, a faithful husband and father, or a good employer, or a contributing member to the community. They just did something bad. So let's deal with that and move on. I think we're too quick to assign labels in the West.
Correct.
And we would do much better to give each other a little grace.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about your book, Tom, The Business of Relationships. What is the biggest takeaway from this book? And I know I'm asking two questions in one, but I think they tie to each other. Why did you decide to write about this topic?
Okay. Well, I've long had a respect for business leaders, and I think that in general, they are given a very short leash. People say, all he does is run a company. All she does is run a company. And we don't seem to assign the same gravitas. In fact, we misplace the gravitas a lot. We say, boy, did you hear what Taylor Swift just said? Boy, did you hear what, Patrick Mahomes just said? Actors, actresses, sports figures, we're taking these little sound bites from them as if they're students of relationships or as if they're students of philosophy. The business leader, on the other hand, I think the ones that we give a little bit short treatment to, these are people who are paid well to have great relationships. I mean, they have to. If you're going to lead a business, you better have a great relationship with your customer, a great relationship with your employees, a great relationship with your vendors, with regulatory agencies, with shareholders and stockholders. And the CEO, if you will, is at the helm of that. So they have to set the example. And I thought, well, who better to learn from? Because these are people who must have great relationships across the board or the business fails. So why don't we listen to them? And that's really where the book came from. I tell people all the time that this is the book that was never supposed to be a book. I'm a quote collector. I find inspiration in wisdom that people convey. And I have quotes from religious leaders, politicians, sports figures, business leaders, etc. And I document those. And I thought, I would write some essays about these. And I wrote the essays for my kids, when they were grown, give them a little direction, give them a little push. And I think maybe around the time I had 10 or 15 of these written that I had sent off to friends and family, somebody suggested it ought to be a newspaper column. And I said, I don't want to do that.
Right.
That's not of interest. But then one day I had lunch with a friend of mine that we've had a couple of articles together in the Business Courier, in the business press here. And he writes for a big conglomerate that is a weekly conglomerate of newspapers that report on business. And I talked to him about these and showed him a few of them. And he said, man, I really like these. With your permission, I think they could be a newspaper column. I'll pitch them to some editors at my paper. And the editors liked them as well. But their comeback was, we are a fact-based business newspaper reporting on regional and national business as it impacts a particular geographical area. We are not an op-ed newspaper. We don't do advice columns. That's just not our wheelhouse. But they said, tell your friend if he had enough of these, they'd be a good book. So it was just this weird set of circumstances. And I poo-pooed that idea for a long time. And he kept bugging me about it. And I ended up sending off a half-baked, half-done manuscript of maybe 6 of the 12 qualities or something. And some publisher got back and said, the publisher who published it got back and said, we would like to do these. When are you going to have the rest of it done?
Oh, wow.
This was a very decidedly a dabbling little project of essays that went to family and friends. And it was years that I was doing that kind of stuff, just in and out of interest and so forth. And all of a sudden now you got a deadline from a publisher to do the other half of the book. So.
But that's wonderful, though. Congratulations, Tom. That's impressive. You must have done
it together. It was quite by accident. In many ways.
I mean, you would have done a really good job that the publisher came back to you and gave you a deadline to finish the rest of the 6 pillars for the book.
I kind of gave myself the deadline because when they were saying, when will you have the rest of it done? I knew darn well they weren't going to want me to say 8 years like the other. So I said, how about 3 or 4 months? I'll give it to you the first of the year. And I met my deadline, but yeah. So.
Nice. So Tom, tell me, I am a firm believer that sometimes what you've experienced in the past plays a huge role, or based on even your work experience and all the experiences, they play a huge role into the message that you decide to give out to the world. So how would you say, based off of this book or what you are sharing with the audience right now, all these suggestions, this advice, how would you say your family or your past experiences and your own relationships have influenced this?
Oh, I think there's an undeniable influence about it. I speak to that in the book in several, different ways, but I've been married more than once. I've struggled with alcohol more than once. Thankfully now, that's gone. I've certainly had my share of business failures as well as business successes. And I think for me anyway, the real test came in the personal side of the relationships of, if a marriage falls apart, does that mean the relationship with the children does as well? You've got to really work at that. You've got to realize that you're going to lose a set of friends, but you need to be able to rebound from that. You need to be able to take a realistic look. A CEO once said that, don't see things as you wish they were, see them as they are. And that's part of that self-reflection that we spoke of earlier. So I don't think that anyone can do a credible job of writing an advice book unless you've lived in the circumstance that you're writing about. And that's really what I tried to do with the book, is acknowledge my own faults, my own failures, some of my own successes.
Awesome. Lovely. Kudos to you. It takes a lot of strength to, first of all, face these situations, and second, come out of it and talk about it. I think it takes a lot of grit and resilience, like you mentioned in the beginning. So congrats, Tom. And I think you deserve all the kudos and the congratulations, because right now you're here with a published book. You have all these lessons that you've learned, problems that you've overcome, and now you're sharing it with the world. I think that's incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that I probably have a cautionary tale that's hopefully inspirational as well. And it ties back to one of the quotes that I used in the book to talk about the necessity of change.
Right.
And the particular CEO, you may be aware of him in Canada, but he's deceased now. But Jack Welch was the chairman and CEO of General Electric for a couple of decades. Jack Welch was a tough guy. I mean, he took no prisoners. He tripled shareholder value. He did 200 acquisitions. He did it sometimes at the expense of employee relations and, various things that maybe if he looked back, he'd say, I wish I would have done that a little differently, as we all do. But he said something that really resonated with me, and it was a speech that he gave to his business leaders in New York when he gathered them. He was a relatively new CEO at the time. And keep in mind, these are people who head up GE Finance or GE Medical Systems or GE Aircraft Engines, all the different business units, big shot people. And Jack said to them, he said, if you are not number one or number two in your marketplace, I will fix you, close you, or sell you. And he followed that by saying, so change before you have to.
Right.
And that mantra, that change before you have to, really resonated with me in personal relationships, because clearly he didn't say it in that context. This was nothing about having a personal relationship. But change before you have to, the financial irresponsibility that threatens your family. Change before you have to, the passive-aggressive behavior with your children that is wrecking that relationship. Change before you have to your bad temper. Change before you have to the budding addiction that is sneaking up on you. I think that many of us could look at that, and if we took nothing else from the book at all and remembered no other observation that you and I have made today, I think change before you have to is a pretty good directive for life in general.
Correct. Agreed. 100%. Beautiful words. That's an incredible thought and an incredible tip that everybody can start changing at least something from their life that they feel is hindering their growth. So thank you so much for those wonderful words, Tom.
You bet.
It was a pleasure having you on our show. Is there any last thoughts, words, or suggestions that you would like to make to our audience?
Yeah, heck, go to Amazon and buy my book. It's called The Business of Relationships. It'll help.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much for your time, Tom, and thank you for being a wonderful guest on our show.
Thank you, Sheekha. It's been great. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. I hope you had a great time listening to this podcast. Just do me a favor and just share this episode with whoever you think is going to benefit from this. Share the love, share the information, and grow together. As always, keep growing, keep glowing, and be yourself. This is your host, Sheekha Singh, signing off. Bye.